Okay, well that's probably a good place to start. Tēnā rawa atu kia koutou katoa e mihi ana ki te whānau o Onewa, Uruamo, me ngā whānau hoki o Northcote electorate nau mai, haere mai. Ki te whakaputa kōrero i tēnei ata, mō te pūtea mone, mihi ana kia koe e Grant nau mai, haere mai ki te whānau nei. Nō reira e te whānau, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Good morning, everyone, and it's all wonderful to see you bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at 7:30 in the morning. Normally we do these things over a wonderful kai, and we have breakfast, and then we have our wonderful speaker come up. But these days we do it on Zoom, and I hope that finds you all well over the past few weeks. It's been a tough few weeks, and I appreciate everyone jumping online today. As it's quite a busy week, given that we're still getting back into things. It's great to see you here, Steph. I know you're about to run a school for the day, so you know I just appreciate everyone that's been able to jump on the line this morning. And acknowledgements to the Honourable Grant Robertson, Minister of Finance, Minister of Sport and Recreation, of course. Great to have you, Grant. What we have here, just so everyone knows, is I sent out a very broad invitation list to key people across the Northcote electorate who may find some value in hearing directly from the Minister to share more information about Budget 2020, and for us locally to have the opportunity to ask him directly any questions that you might have within a local context. But time is of the essence, so that's my introduction. I won't take up too much time. I'll hand it over to you, Grant. But can I also acknowledge my colleague, Maya Lubeck, Labour List MP based in Albany. Wonderful to see you this morning. But to all of our friends out in the electorate, thank you again for joining us. Thanks, Grant.
Grant, you're on mute.
Rookie mistake. Tēnā koe, Shannon, namahi nui kia koutou katoa, atamaria. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you at 7:30 on a Thursday morning. The good news is that in the old days, I might have tried to have flown up to Auckland, you know, getting up even earlier in the morning to do something like this. So there are some small mercies in all of this. Can I also acknowledge my friend and parliamentary colleague as well, and all of you for joining us here today. For me, Budget 2020 didn't really end up the way I expected it to. So for those of you who know a little bit about how budgets get created, basically you spend about 6 months working out what the priorities for the government are, and we did that, and we produced those towards the end of last year, and all the different government ministers and government departments and MPs all have their ideas, and they feed them through, and there's a lot of debate, and by about late February, early March, the budget's usually pretty much done and dusted, and we put it to Cabinet about 6 weeks before it's announced for its final approval. Well, as you can imagine, with this year, that timeline was not in a good place, and so around about the beginning of March, we began to realise what the impact of COVID-19 was looking like. Even then, we probably didn't have a full understanding, as nobody in the world did, about the extent of its impact. And so when it came time at the beginning of April for us to approve the budget, we essentially created a budget with two halves to it, and they're not quite even halves. One half is what we need to do to just keep the lights on for the government. So that's the core funding of our schools, our hospitals, prisons, etc. And we kept all of that in place, but we made a decision then that we needed to be flexible, and that we needed to be able to respond as COVID-19 evolved and as we understood more about its impact. And so that's what created essentially the second half of our job at budget time, and that's the creation of the COVID Response and Recovery Fund, which I'll talk about in a little minute. So it was very different. It meant we had to be really flexible. We agreed the final bits of the budget on last Monday, 4 days before it was produced. It would be fair to say that my friends at the Treasury were finding that a bit tough. That's not how they normally do things, and they were amazing. Actually, they did incredible work to support us to get it out. But it was put together under a lot of time constraint. But I think it was really important that we were able to respond in real time to what was happening. And so what the budget does is that it takes on the 3 parts of our plan for dealing with COVID-19, and they are to respond, recover, and rebuild. And you'll hear a lot about the 3 R's, slightly different 3 R's than the ones you might remember, about the way we're dealing with COVID-19. And the response bit, you're all pretty familiar with the core elements of, and that's the amazing effort that, to use Jacinda's phrase, the team of 5 million, the whānau of 5 million have managed, which is to effectively get control of COVID-19. And we did that together, and everyone in New Zealand should be incredibly proud of that. And it's now our job to take that unity that went with that and apply it to our economic and social response to COVID-19 as much as the health response. So the budget carries on some of the work that we had in the response phase. So in particular, it carries on the health response. There's the largest ever increase for health spending in a budget, in this budget, around $5.9 billion going into our health sector. A big chunk of that is the money that we provide to DHBs, the largest ever increase there. For those who've been around for a little while, and I recognise some familiar faces in front of me from my previous visits to the shore, you'll know that one of the ways we've in the past measured both ourselves and the previous government on health spending has been around whether or not it's enough to keep up with our population increase and also the impact of an ageing population on the health system. And if we were to have done that, the increase per year for the DHBs would have been about 710 million. We've put in 980 million per year into the DHBs. So we're well ahead of what's required for the inflation and for the aging and growing population. And that's what's needed, because I think what we've all seen, and this will be one of the big debates, I think, in the election, is that the importance of strong public services in dealing with a crisis like this. You know, we need a strong, well-funded health system, and that's what Labour's continues to be committed to. We put some more money on top of what we already had into what's called the capital expenditure, the money for our health buildings, and I know that there's a lot of interest in that on the shore with North Shore Hospital, and we continue to want to be able to invest into that. So those health services were a really important part of that core budget. We've also added funding for those areas that have been really affected by COVID-19, so extra money for surgeries that were missed out on during the period that we had the lockdown. And actually some important stuff you might not have heard about last week, where we've given additional money for a whole range of services, ambulances, aged care, hospices, all people who've really struggled over the last month or two. And so that extra funding is really important. Plus a lot of other important areas. One that I don't want to skate past it because it's really significant to me is the support that we've given for early childhood education in this budget. In many ways, Chris Hipkins and I, when we sat down about 3 years ago, made the decision that we were looking at. The first budget was one that was, in an education sense, was really around tertiary education and fees free and so on. The second one was around the schooling system and what we could do there, donations and so forth. And then the third one was always going to be early childhood education, and we weren't prepared to sacrifice that in the face of COVID-19. And so you would have seen our commitment to 100% qualified staff, to a pay boost, and to an operational funding boost for ECE. And that's, I think, a really significant thing as we try to make sure our education system is fit for purpose. So that core part of the budget was there, but obviously the big focus became, as we moved through the response phase, to our recovery and our rebuild. And that's really where the budget found most of its space. You'll be aware we established this fund, the COVID Response and Recovery Fund. It's enormous. The sums of money are enormous. It's $50 billion. that when you add that to the 12.5 billion that we had already spent in our COVID, already allocated in our COVID response, so $62.5 billion, that for those who do the measurement of things like GDP, that's about 20% of our GDP. So governments don't make those kinds of investments every day. But for me, this is the rainy day, and it hasn't gone without challenge, the approach that we've taken to be very careful with our finances for the prospect that there might be a rainy day. Well, it's arrived now, and my view is, what's the point of having saved for a rainy day if you don't put the umbrella up? And that's what we've done. We've put the umbrella up to protect our people and to get us through the situation. And we're in a strong position to do that, but this is a 1 in 100 year shock to our economy, and it is going to be felt for a very long time in New Zealand. But we've got to do our best to protect all our people, our communities, and our households to be able to get through this. So the big focus, as you all would have heard over the last week or so in Budget 19, and this part of it is around jobs. And it is because we are facing, as most countries in the world are, a significant economic downturn and a significant loss of jobs. And so if you look to the United States, for example, you would have seen that unemployment there is creeping up towards 40 million people. That's, you know, well over 10%. I think it's heading towards 15% of their population. Other countries in the world similarly facing that. The forecasts for us are that if we do this right, if we get our investments right, we can actually get unemployment back down to around where it is now within 2 years. Now that is ambitious, but it is possible if we make our investments right and we support job creation and people keeping their jobs. And so the first part of that was the extension of the wage subsidy scheme. You'll know that the wage subsidy scheme has kept around 1.6 million people in work. It's been a massive undertaking, and a huge congratulations to MSD and Carmel for the work that she's done in making sure that money has got out the door. Our extension is a targeted one because as businesses reopen in level 2, people are starting to get back to normal, but it's going to be a long road back. And for some businesses, particularly in retail, hospitality, tourism, those areas, they are far from back to normal. And so we wanted to continue to provide that support for those businesses. That package is worth up to about $3.2 billion. So it's a big package, and a lot of businesses will be supported by it, on top of what we've already done with other changes to the tax system and support through our small business loan scheme and so on. So that's a really important extension to that. Otherwise, a big focus on where we can create and support job creation in the economy. So that means, for example, in infrastructure. There are so many things that need to be done in our communities right around New Zealand. We went out and asked for local government, private sector, central government to come back to us and say, what projects are out there? We got 2,000. And I want to say right now, we're not going to be able to fund all of those 2,000 projects, but I think in many ways what that highlights is the big infrastructure deficit that we inherited as a government right around the country. We've already put 12 billion on the table for our NZ upgrade program, which includes things like Skypath and other projects like that. This is on top of that, and we put an additional 3 billion on the table, and I actually think we'll need to put more, I know we'll need to put more in as time goes on, and that's important. It starts to address some of our long-term issues as well as helps create jobs. And that's really what this budget in many ways is setting our path forward, is linking our recovery to our rebuild, because we do want to rebuild better than we were. You know, New Zealand is a terrific country and we've been doing really well, but as I said on budget day, there aren't many times in your life when you get to push the reset button, and we have that opportunity. And it's a funny word to use in such a difficult situation, but it is true. And this opportunity we need to take to make sure we address some of the longer term issues that New Zealand has had. And one of those is around our low productivity, the fact that we all work really hard, but we don't produce as much as other countries in the world do. And one of the reasons for that is because of our poor infrastructure. So hence why we're investing in it. It's a job creator and it helps address that long-term issue. Same with housing, and obviously I know that's an issue with a number of housing developments on the shore. It is really important that we invest in construction. The government is going to do its bit. We're promising an extra 8,000 public housing places on top of the 6,400 that we've already committed to. Kāinga Ora, used to be known as Housing New Zealand, is actually ahead of schedule in its public state house building program. This adds an extra dimension to them, and we want to see these developments right around the country. They're a mixture of public housing and transitional housing to support people as they move through into a more stable living environment. Along the way of COVID-19, we've invested an extra $100 million in housing the homeless. And actually, that's been one of the byproducts of COVID-19 is we've been able to get a lot more people into stable housing, and we want to build on that as part of that. But again, the construction industry, one that's job rich. You would have seen the announcement from Fletcher's yesterday, which is pretty disappointing, I have to say. Fletcher's have argued with us that it's not really about what we're doing. Around 50% of their business is the private residential construction market, where they see things slowing down significantly, hence why they've made the decisions they've made. Overall, the budget's forecast to save about 140,000 jobs, and over the next 4 years create another 300,000. But unfortunately, we cannot save every single job, and we've had to be honest about that from the beginning, but we're doing our very, very best to keep as many people in work as we possibly can. The construction sector is another really good example of us trying to address the long-term issues in our rebuild, and it relates to the big $1.4 billion package for trade training and apprenticeships that's in the budget. I know this from experience. A family member of mine, when we went through the global financial crisis, had just left school and he'd got a job as an apprentice, and he was the first person laid off in the wake of the global financial crisis, and it actually sent his life into a little bit of a downward spiral for a while. We are committed to avoiding that kind of thing, not only for the cost to the individuals and their whānau, but also to all of us, because what happened after the global financial crisis in the construction sector was that the number of people employed dropped by about 20-odd%, so that when there was a recovery and people wanted to get on with building, the workforce wasn't there to do it because we hadn't invested in the skills in the meantime. So we're committed to making sure that skill gap never arises again. So therefore, that $1.4 billion program is about making sure, for example, we support businesses to keep their apprentices on. So there's $400 million odd to say, please don't let someone who's partway through an apprenticeship be laid off, keep them all the way through to the end, plus free apprenticeships and trade training in areas like construction, manufacturing, community care and healthcare, areas where we know we've got gaps and we will need more people, and we'd like to expand that program over time as well. So that's another example of the recovery bit, construction being part of the rebuild of getting on top of our skills deficit that we've had. A load of other jobs being created, particularly in the environment and conservation sector. I'm really pleased about this package. It's another $1 billion package, very practical. It's about fencing our waterways to make sure that we stop pollution getting into them. It's about getting on top of pest and pest management issues that we've got. It's about our dock program, dock jobs for nature program, which is about our tracks and our huts and the dock estate. About 11,000 jobs forecast to be created there, and very practical on the ground opportunities for people to get skills. So those big job creation packages are a central part of the budget. Along with that, we've got a number of sector packages, and you can expect to see more of these over time as we see the impacts of COVID-19 come through. So one that got a lot of publicity on the day is around tourism, where we've got effectively our first instalment, which is a $400 million program to invest in helping our tourism sector transition to its next phase. And I think you'll all understand that one of our great successes from keeping COVID-19 under control came from closing our borders. But unfortunately, in doing so, there's an enormous collateral damage for the people who are unable to fulfill their role in the tourism sector and the aviation sector. And that's incredibly hard for those people. So we need to support a transition to either can a tourism business work in the domestic market, or do they need to take advantage of some of the changes we've made to insolvency law that effectively allows people to put their business into hibernation for a period of time, or are there other things that the people want to redeploy and do? So that funds the initial contribution from the government to that, and I suspect you'll find there'll be more to come in that area. Number of other packages though that are supporting people. I want to give a big shout out here to our whānau order providers. One of them really good things that happened in this budget, in this crisis, was the way in which the whānau order providers just stepped up to provide care in their community. I think nearly 200,000 care packages handed out across our whānau around New Zealand. That's been hugely important. So part of the big package we've got around supporting Māori response to COVID-19 is a big boost, $137 million boost to our whānau order providers. Part of a nearly $1 billion package to support Māori in response to COVID-19. We all know that when there is an economic downturn, it is those who are already disadvantaged who come off the worst from it. And unfortunately, in our statistics around employment and housing and so on, Māori are disproportionately disadvantaged. And so this package is about saying, again, we're not prepared to sit on the sidelines and let that happen. So a big investment in Māori trades training, cadetship programs, education programs, support for whānau order and support for housing. It's a big ambitious program, and one that I hope pays off, because we know that where the impacts will sit. Similarly with our Pacifica communities and a big package there as well. And then finally, in terms of just a skate across the budget, is the social toll that the budget has. So yes, this is about jobs and about keeping people in work, but we also know that our communities are doing it tough. And so there's a big boost for our food in schools program, around over $200 million boost to get that program out to 200,000 children. It also creates 2,000 jobs in the communities where the food in schools program is provided, and it's a significant program across our communities. That comes on top of the $2.8 billion package we put in place on the 17th of March to lift main benefits by $25 per week and double the winter energy payment for this year. That is an early recognition from us that our low-income people are going to be fighting this hard, and we've put that boost in place, plus significant boosts for the community organisations that support our people. Everything from family violence services, where we've built on last year's record investment to be able to support those. Community organisations, there's several grant schemes that have been set up, including a $36 million one for grassroots community organisations. And noting the presence of Michael Smythe on the call, I would also note that there is an arts recovery package that the Prime Minister is set to announce anytime soon, and for Helen, yes, as well. And so we do understand that in the sectors like arts, and the one that I'm also responsible for in the sports and recreation sector, the funding sources have basically dried up. People can't hold gigs or events. We know that sponsorship's hard to find at the moment. The community trusts and the gaming trusts, and we could have a debate about whether the gaming trusts are a good bit of the funding of the arts and sports, but they are, and they're not available at the moment. So I've announced a sports recovery package, and the Prime Minister will very shortly announce an arts recovery one as well. So those sector packages are really important to help our communities recover. I want to mention very briefly just two small things in the budget that for me were very symbolic of how our response is going to be different from the responses of previous governments to economic downturn. The first of those was dealing with a voluntary group of volunteers in our community who have needed support for a long time, and that's our surf lifesavers. And while it might seem like a small thing, it's hugely significant to me that what's effectively part of our emergency services network has never really been funded by the government. Well, our surf lifesavers are really going to struggle to put in any donation capacity. So we've put around $60 million baseline that funding, so it will go on forever to support that really important part of our community. The other one is the return of funding for adult and community education. And this is, to me, was symbolic of what went wrong in New Zealand after the global financial crisis. The 2009 budget cut adult and community education funding at the very time that it was needed, when people lost their jobs. We're not prepared to see that happen again. And so we've restored that funding. The ACE as a sector, as it's called, is different now than what it was 10 years ago, and so the funding will go in a slightly different way. But this does mean the return of the likes of night schools, because they'll be a really important part of people getting the new skills that they need, and they're community-based. People can easily access them, and for me it's just a hugely important signal that we can give to people that we understand in a crisis like this how we should respond. Shannon, I'll finish there, but maybe just with one or two quick summing ups about some of the questions that I get pretty regularly about the money side of the budget. We are obviously borrowing a significant amount more money to do all of this rebuilding and recovery. As I said before, this is the rainy day that we've been saving for. We came into this crisis with one of the lowest levels of government debt in the world. And that means that we're in a much stronger position to invest than other countries. So to give you the percentages, they're done as percentages of GDP. New Zealand had 19% going in. The UK had around 75% of GDP as debt. The US 90%. A comparable sized country like Ireland had about 40% going in. So we're in a much stronger position than them. So yes, our debt will grow up to around 53% over the 4 years before it starts to come down from there. But that is the right thing and the responsible thing to do when our people are going through a 1 in 100 year shock. We will do everything we can to keep that as low as possible, but what we won't do is take up the austerity policies that we've seen that have marked the response to crises like this in the past. Our response is to invest in our people and our communities. And as I said at the beginning, if we take the whānau of 5 million approach, then I believe that we'll have the same success we had in our health response and our economic response. But there are tough times ahead, and the government will continue to respond in real time. I said on budget day, that's one thing that made this budget really different from the ones we've seen before. It's not the end of the story. It's actually just one more staging post in our response, and our economic response to COVID-19 happens every day, not just on budget day. And so you will expect to hear a bit more from me and others in the coming months as our response continues to evolve. So Shannon, I'll leave it at that, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Thanks very much, Grant, and appreciate all the work that you've been doing, and I was hoping that you had a coffee next to you after all of that. But what we'll do is we do have questions that people have submitted as they RSVP'd to this event. So just so we can get through as many as possible, I'm going to invite people to introduce themselves briefly and then roll straight into their question for Grant if they can. So I'm going to start with the king of bike kaupatiki, Duncan Laidlaw.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm on back at the area at the moment with my bike as I get through to work. Great package. Auckland Council committed when they were looking at their shovel-ready project.
Hey Duncan, I'll just get you to talk closer to your microphone if you can.
Okay, this might be better.
There you are.
Yep. Auckland Council committed to ensuring the shovel-ready projects they were putting forward had climate responsibility. How much work's been put in on that front to ensure that as we go forward, the projects that we're doing actually benefit our community into the future?
Yeah, thanks, Duncan, and a big chunk of work there. I think the important thing to remember is that as we did with the New Zealand upgrade program that we announced in January, we made sure that it was part of fulfilling our overall government goals, and that includes our transition to a low carbon economy. And so you can expect when we go through this next phase around infrastructure that we'll apply the same principles. So things like SkyPath/CPath, and the work that's been done on extending cycling and walking opportunities in our cities and towns will carry on as part of this next phase. But actually more than that, one of the things I think we've got to do is look at the way our infrastructure is supportive of a really a 21st century society and economy. So an example maybe a little outside of your direct interest in transport, but and the way in which we do our energy system. So, New Zealand's fantastic. We've got about 90-odd% renewable energy for our electricity, but there are more opportunities there for us, and things like hydrogen, green hydrogen becoming the world home of that. So you can expect when you see the infrastructure projects to see more of that. Having said that, there is there is some pretty basic stuff that needs to be done, and I have to say I haven't had a chance to read all 2,000 of the projects that have come in. Be fair to say, Mayor Phil Goff and his council have not been shy. They are well represented among those 2,000 projects. But one of the things that's really noticeable is some of the very basic infrastructure needs that still need to be met. In particular, our water infrastructure, and while Water Care in Auckland has done a lot there, and things like the Central Interceptor and so on are important, it's actually really noticeable. A lot of the stuff coming through from local government is at that quite basic level. So we'll try and get the balance right between that, but rest assured, and the many people who've written to me to say, please make sure the infrastructure supports our climate change goals, can rest assured that that is definitely part of our thinking.
Thanks, Duncan. I'll come to you, Gary Holmes, Manager of Northcote Business Association.
Thanks, Shannon, and thanks, Grant. We've got about 70 small businesses in the Northcote Town Centre, a mixture of hospitality and service related, and we've had a few casualties now that we've gone into level 2. But we did a survey during the lockdown period just to find out from our members what help and assistance they needed and where we could best help or resource and help them. One of the big things that came out was the whole issue of commercial rent and some sort of rent relief. And while a number of the properties in the town centre are owned and sort of managed by Panuku, a number of them are also privately held. There was some suggestion early on that the government was looking at that matter of some sort of commercial rent relief, and I'm aware of how tricky that can be, given that you've got competing interests. But I just wondered whether any further thought had gone into that. It is just worth noting that the wage subsidies certainly helped many of our members with retaining staff, but the trouble obviously that they have faced is paying the next big cost, which is their rent.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary, and absolutely understand just how tough this has been, particularly for small and medium enterprises. The wage subsidy, as you note, has been important for the biggest bill that most businesses have, which is their wage bill, but their second and third biggest bills tend to be their rent and their utilities. And that's one of the reasons why we moved to the small business cash flow loan scheme. So that's an interest-free scheme for the first year and no repayments required for the first 2, and then 3% over a 5-year term. That's had massive uptake from particularly the smaller businesses, because it's an access to some capital or some working capital that they wouldn't have otherwise had. So that was part of our response to the issues of those fixed costs. On the specific issue of rents here, you've highlighted the exact issue that's made this a tricky one to deal with, Gary, is that there are 2 partners in this. And while the example you give is probably one where the power imbalance is clearly tipped in favour of the landlord, one of the issues we've got is that in some other situations, we've got buildings where the sole occupant is a large multinational and the landlord is actually effectively a small business person. And so getting that balance right in terms of our intervention for what kind of relief we can help provide has been hard. We are still working on it, and I would expect to be able to say something very soon about that issue and what help we might be able to give. As I'm sure you well know, and in Auckland almost all of the contracts will include the Auckland District Law Society clause. That means if you couldn't occupy, you are entitled to rent remission. That has not been enforced in a consistent way. And so that is one of the issues we're also looking at. So I hope to have a bit more to say about it, but we have tried to continually update our response. Some of the tax changes will also be helpful to people who are businesses in that area. So yeah, continue to watch this space, but the opportunity is there for those with 50 or fewer employees to be part of the small business cash flow scheme.
Thanks, Gary. Over to you, Michael, local CEO and Birkenhead of RAD3.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Shannon. So Grant, I just I mean, excellent presentation. Thanks for that. I've been in software for 30 plus years, so this is not my first recession. And some of them, software suffers worse, and sometimes software suffers not bad. But one of the last year's budget with the VIF funding was really good. One of the things New Zealand's lacked forever is a consistent VC fund. And I think if we can get cross-party support for VIF long-term or something similar, that's a good thing for our economy. You mentioned before that we need to get productivity up. Technology is clearly a way to do that. The thing that we're missing compared to other nations is access to grants readily for companies that are not just technology organizations. So that's the ability for someone wants to go, you know, they might have a bricks and mortar business, they want to go online, the cost of rebuilding that website is 20K, how do I get access to that money? And the tax is good, it's one method, but sometimes, particularly in these times, just cash in hand works really, really well. I'm on the board of Canteen, and one of the things that we're working towards is moving away, our base is gone. We need to move towards digitization. One of the things that'd be great if we'd access from there is, again, a technology grant to support not-for-profits. And that would be the case with Bike NZ and many, many companies. So there's that. The other side is that we've put this money into the apprenticeship scheme, which is awesome, and we should be doing that, and that drives up the baseline. But in technology, our version of apprenticeships is startups. And one of the things that we don't have going for us right now is a strong startup base. The liquidity that exists within the high net worths is problematic. Our angel base in New Zealand is problematic at best. It's not mature, it's not smart. There's some winners and some losers, and typically the serial entrepreneurs are the ones who play the hard game. So getting some way to create a very accessible and, as we did with the grant, high trust environment for tech startups to get from zero to somewhere. And even if that money is burnt, it keeps people in jobs, it builds our intellectual property base, we get to experiment and find out if that business was a good idea or not, so it increases our productivity as well. So there's that. I know the budget's not everything, I know there's more coming, but if I can put that plug in, that's really important. And then that rounds out to, if you bring it back to Birkenhead and Northcote, we moved our company from Freeman's Bay to Birkenhead about 4 years ago. And when we did it, we thought, really, we're going to be only technology business on the shore. Not quite, but it felt like that. I think as we look at remote working, as we look at building technology companies in different places, startups won't generally occupy the city. They'll move out, they'll basement garage sort of stuff, and then they'll move into Northcote or they'll move into Birkenhead because those rents are cheap. So instead of having yet another $2 shop, we start going, actually, that's a little web shop startup, or that's a little, and so on and so forth. So bringing those, if you like, a much more proletariat grid model to an urban environment makes a lot of sense. So it's sort of not necessarily big ticket, it's not up there with the stuff you're talking about, but it is good to think about that for our economy going forward, because we do need to move off a low productive economy, moving away from tourism, which just burns people, not cash. We need to create things where people's hourly rate is $70 an hour, not 16. So.
Yeah, look, Michael, incredibly good points. I've got some practical answers for you and some where the response is still to come. So in the budget is a fund specifically aimed at SMEs for e-commerce as a grant-based fund to support them to do websites and to support them to lift their offering there. You make a really interesting point about not-for-profits access to that. And that's something that I'll take away, because I don't think we did include that. It's specifically targeted at SMEs, but it came through our Small Business Advisory Council, who just said exactly the point that you've made, that one of the things that's been highlighted here is the way in which we need to support people to shift their offering in that direction. In terms of startups, 100% agree with you. We're tweaking the Callaghan Innovation Fund to be able to play a greater role there. I have to say we're all a bit worried about the stability of our angel network at the moment in terms of where we are. That'll come back, but it is just a matter of us making sure we play our part during that. And as you say, we obviously put the money on the table last year. The process for that's well advanced in terms of the acceleration of VIF, but we just need to keep a wary eye on where things are. It's a sector I used to do a bit of work in before I came into politics, and I'm aware of its fragility, but actually also of the opportunity that sits there. Again, something that didn't get a lot of attention on Budget Day because there was an awful lot in it was further funding for what we're calling industry transformation plans. And we've done those, and we want to do those in areas where we see that potential. So an example is agri-tech. Another example is the broader digital sector, where we're going to get across the whole sector and say what is required. And that brings me to the last of your points, which is warms my heart to hear. I spend a fair bit of our time in opposition working on a thing called the Future of Work Commission. And the underlying philosophy of that was the concept of building wealth from the ground up. And that is exactly what you've just described in terms of the way in which I agree with you. Businesses will, small startups, etc., will find their way eventually to the Birkenheads, the Northcotes, and so on of the world. And we do want that. We want people to be able to look at their community and see the entrepreneurial small businesses, because I actually feel like that will be one legacy of COVID-19, people understanding more about who are the small and medium enterprises in their community. And there's a sort of an old school way of talking about that, which is the Buy Kiwi Made concepts, which are good. But I also think that there's another way of thinking about that, which is that what do you want your community to be like? How do you want it to interact? And I think I want to see us carry that spirit on. I think we are far more conscious consumers in a crisis like this, and it's time that we took that and added it to the way in which we want our communities to develop. And so I want more in the small and medium enterprise space. One of the indisputable facts about where the job losses are going to come from is that women will be disproportionately affected because of the sectors that are being most affected. We must make sure that our response recognises that, and while construction and areas like that, we want more women involved in those areas, we also have to be really adroit to move towards what sectors like the digital one, like small businesses, where we will be able to see more women take up employment opportunities too. So all of that, Michael, is just a long answer to say I agree. There's some practical stuff in the budget to help, and there's got to be more to come there too. And I'll take up that idea about the not-for-profit access to that e-commerce type support. I think it's a really good one.
Great, thanks, Michael. I'll come to Steph and then fire Livy, and then down to Francis. Over to you, Steph.
Morning, everybody. Kia ora, I'm the principal at Beachhaven Primary School, and I wear a number of hats. So I'm also the Kahui Ako lead for the Te Ara Whetū cluster, and I'm on the New Zealand Principals Federation Executive. So obviously education is front and centre for me on a national level, but also on a local level. I just wanted to say I really like the way that Labour has responded to this crisis in an agile way. And I was interested when you were talking about the umbrella and the investment in that umbrella to protect us from the storm. My question relates to equity. And because I have a tendency to go off piste a little bit, I've had to write it down so I don't. So I'll just read my question and hope for the best that I didn't mess it up. What I'm curious about is what are the continuing plans for addressing equity amongst our students, given the COVID-19 pandemic starkly highlighted the inequitable access to education for our most vulnerable. In particular, this was around the digital divide. While some steps were made in haste, which is great, to try and rectify this, a lot of students missed out. And in our own community, the equity divide between those who have and those who have not was really, really obvious. So I'm curious about what kind of appetite there is about addressing this as we go forward. Yes, we need a really strong economy, but if that economy isn't built on a foundation of equity, it's a foundation of straw. And I was interested in what Michael's talking about tech, and particularly because that future of work and looking at entrepreneurship going forward, our kids can't access education in an environment where the world basically poops itself, we've got a real issue. And one of the things that I've noticed, and I'm hopeful going forward, that our peak bodies, including NZPF, will work with Chris on, is because this has become an absolute issue, and it's showing what's important and what's not important. It was great to have the 30-year plan and the 30-year vision, and I was fortunate to be part of that. But I think what we now need to look at is, because of this situation, it's really obvious now where those gaps are, and what does that look like going forward? Because the budget was great, and there's a lot of things in there, but with my educationist hat on, what I couldn't see was how we were going to address that going forward. And that's not just the digital tech, but it's the inequities around property. And it would appear on the face of it, when you drive around, that if you are in one of the places, you have access to things more than the students in places like mine. So that's my question. And there's a lot of more, and I do apologise. And I also know that you're not Chris Hipkins, but with your finance hat on, we have this opportunity, as you said, to reset. And it is, you know, like Winston Churchill said, you know, let's not waste a good crisis. How will we respond to that equity? How will we recover from the inequities that were really, really highlighted and rebuild from that?
Kia ora, Steph. Thank you for that. And like you say, there's quite a lot to unpack there. I guess the first thing I would say is that the things that mattered to me and to Chris and to the Labour Party going into this haven't gone away. And one of the driving forces we have for being in politics is trying to address those inequalities and inequities that we see in our society. And so we have tried to do that through a range of different investments and the changes to the plans that you've been aware of. I think you raise a really good point about the fact that the crisis, really all it does in some ways is just put into sharp relief the things that are already there. So the digital divide question, you know, as you say, we responded really quickly, but one of the things a lot of New Zealanders kind of had to, you know, couldn't quite grasp was the fact that we were having to send modems out to people was because they didn't have internet access at home. And so for so many New Zealanders, that was like a revelation. And so, as you say, doing that in a crisis is one thing, but taking that digital divide on is another. And I can just reassure you that that issue is now front and center in our minds, because all of the things Michael was just talking about, if it's not available to you, it's not available to you. And so we have to make sure we do that. The second thing is, and I know you know this, and so I don't mean to say it in a way that patronize or anything like that, is that addressing the inequities can't all happen inside the school gate. And so we've got to get back to those issues around ensuring that people have access to income, that they're supported to deal with the complex social issues that they're doing. And so the extra supports for the social agencies to be able to be there, the whānau order approach, the wraparound approach in terms of housing, those issues have to be resolved by us as a government before you, Steph, end up having to deal with the downstream consequences of that. So that's within the funding pool there as well. And I just want to reassure you too, I mean, I'm the finance minister. My job is to talk about the dollars and the numbers and all of that. But I also am a strong believer in the fact that the economy is not an end in itself. It's merely the means by which we create the society that we think is important. And I think this is the reset opportunity there, is to say, actually, the thing we've realized through this is, A, we're all in this together. He waka eke noa. We are, you know, this is something we need to be doing together, and we can't just drop that now we've done the health bit. We've got to bring that back in. But also B, that we won't get anywhere unless the education system is strong at every level. So there have been some big investments in terms of things like the pay issues that we, you know, the catch-up pay issues that we dealt with, the school property issues. We've tried to get on top of the decile system. The property issues, I know, are big, long-term ones, and we put that money in as part of that package that we announced late last year to help you with the day-to-day maintenance. But the long-term plan is a 10-year one. Another chunk of money went in this budget, and it's just a matter of making sure we keep going on that. So I really, you know, thank you for the work you're doing, but also for highlighting that those issues haven't gone away. And in fact, they've just been put into sharp relief. They're front and centre for us.
Thanks, Steph. Fire Livy. You're just on mute, Fire. Unmute yourself.
Oh, yes, you're with us now. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Minister. First of all, I want to thank you for a brilliant job managing the money in this time of COVID-19 and under normal circumstances. Congratulations for a great job done. Ngā mihi ki a koe.
Thank you.
In the job ones, the job portal that's come out is pretty magic. We're using that a lot in our providers with our CSW kaiarahi, encouraging people to go for jobs, so that's a good one. The apprenticeships, of course, are the ones that back in the 60s when they had the apprenticeships, those builders came out of there in droves. So for our people, those are very strong. Thing. The one I want to bring to your attention, sir, is the telehealth environment that's just coming into being. I see on the television the other morning advertising around the dial-a-doctor. I don't want to, and I'm not against telehealth. I think it has a valuable place in primary care where we're at now, where it's very difficult to access and shortage of doctors. However, that's really good for the young and the healthy, the worried well, and as you know, in the primary sector, the market-driven doctor surgeries are, telehealth opens the gate for them to go for the worried well, and the healthier ones are the lower fruit, so to speak. And this, to me, is about a question about balance, or a notice to you actually around the balance of making sure that the well-being of whānau and the vulnerable elderly and the genuinely sick, there needs to be a balance in managing this new scene to make sure that we've got that balance between those two areas. That's my concern as a health and social welfare, Māori health in the last 55 years. This is one of the dangers I see coming with, that this wouldn't be managed properly. Kia ora.
Kia ora. I mean, you are so right about the way in which that we have to make sure that our broad range of social and health services are delivered in a way that is accessible for whānau, but also, you know, has sitting behind it as a kaupapa that is about, you know, people. And I too have some concerns, particularly for our older population when it comes to access to health services when we move into this more, you know, digital phase. So rest assured that's understood. One thing, Fire, that is worth noting is that we have undertaken a big review of our health and disability system. It's been led by Heather Simpson, who used to be Helen Clark's right-hand woman. She's got a background in the health sector as well. And that review is due to us very soon. And I think it'll start to address anyway the issues that you raise around particularly the primary care model, and the fact that this goes all the way back to the first Labour government when they had a big row with the New Zealand Medical Association about GPs and how GPs should be funded, and we've never really come back from that. Yet in the meantime, we've seen loads of other providers emerge in the primary healthcare space and in the social service space, including the ones that you work for and with. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing that report and taking a fresh look at the way that we deliver those services in our community, because there is no one size fits all model, and it is really important that we get to the grassroots of what works in our communities. So thank you for what you're doing, and very much take that on board as part of our next response.
Nā koe whaia, Liv. Coming down to Uruamo Marae, Francis Waka.
Ngā mihi mahana kia koutou katoa. To you, Shannon, thank you very much for the opportunity today. And I get why you put me at this end of the kōrero, we all know I can talk forever. And to you, Minister, thank you so much. On behalf of all our whānau here in Uruamua, we really appreciate what both you and your government are doing for us. For me, you know, I'll be honest, I can't say I've ever been a Labour voter, but I do love what our Labour government has done over this, you know, this awful time of COVID-19. The quick responses, the genuine, you know, on the ground help. You know, you've reached our people where they're hurting and exactly when they're hurting. So, you know, we're really, really grateful for that. I have 1,000,001 questions, but, you know, so I am the chairperson of Uruamua Maranga Ake Marae. We don't actually have a marae. We're yet to build that, but we still perform as if we have that physical marae. We have a marae in our garages and so on, and we do all the mahi that other marae do, just without that physical space. So when we saw what was happening, that this COVID was here and it was gonna everything was going to just move so rapidly, we decided we had to mobilise ourselves. So we don't have any funding or anything like that, but we have each other. So we just got ourselves organised, went out to the shops before level 4 could kick in, and bought up every single crossword book and, you know, decks of playing cards, little treats. Our main purpose was to ensure that our kaumātua and kuia were taken care of in the way they deserve to be taken care of. So we just mobilised ourselves. There's about a team of 9 of us. We set up a phone tree. We, you know, delivered whatever we had. We supported all the local community groups that were doing things. Our community houses were amazing. They had things going. To Puna Hauora, our health provider, they've been amazing. You know, they were able to get funding and so on. So we decided, let's not try and reinvent the wheel. Let's tap into whatever's out there, and, you know, beg, borrow, whatever you got to do. And we did all those things. And fortunately, we've been able to provide for our kaumātua and kuia in a way that they deserve to be provided for. You know, we're not putting strangers at their door. We're ringing up and having a laugh. You know, we're turning up with home baking, all those sorts of things, doing everything at a safe distance. And, you know, if you talk to our people who are doing the deliveries, they know, you know, I'm out there with the whip. Put your gloves on, wash your hand, all those normal things. And no, you're not allowed to kiss them. No, you're not allowed to let them hug you. You know, all those things. We were quite strict with that. But anyway, I suppose I should be asking a question, shouldn't I? The question.
If you want to.
Hey, I've got stories to go for hours. But you know, I did want to thank our government. I did want to also thank all our other community groups, you know, who we've tapped into. We've also had to reach further afield right through Tamaki Makaurau to all our friends in the other marae. So we're part of a collective of marae here in Tamaki Makaurau. There's, I think, roughly about 48 of us. So what we've been doing is, you know, if one of us wants to go and buy firewood, we check, does anybody else? You know, and it's about getting that power to get things at a more reasonable cost. So we're doing all those things. So I suppose the biggest thing I need to know is around the funding. So I see there's, what's the name of that funding? It is the Grassroots Grant. Now, I don't know if we are eligible to apply for those types of grants. We're also reluctant to go too hard on grants with, we don't have the infrastructure, i.e. everybody, thank God, have jobs, except me. So they've all busy with their day jobs, with their families, and so on. So there's little old me with my 2-finger typing to just keep things rolling over. I suppose, funding would be great to help with maybe kaimahi, part-time, 2 part-time kaimahi, so that we can fill in the forms and, do all those reviews that we're always asked for and, all those things. It's been good working with Te Puna, for instance. We've tapped in with them. They get to do all the paperwork. We get to dish out all the great things that we're able to receive through them.
That's the answer, I think, is to be in partnership with those people so that you don't have to do all of that. Just on that specific community fund, it is very much designed for the grassroots organisations like yourselves. So I would suggest, Shannon, that you have a chat with Nanaya around hooking up the marae with that support. It is designed to really get down to the grassroots there. So that would be my answer. Sorry to interrupt you, Fire. I have to go and do another one of these for the Hutt Valley people in Wellington in about 10 minutes. So I think that was my only reason to interrupt. But say, ngā mihi to you as well for what you're doing in the community. It's awesome.
Minister.
Francis.
Shannon, can I just do one more? I'm sorry, just around Grant with the partnering up with people, i.e. Te Puna Hauora. We're finding partnering up is very difficult if we're not with a kaupapa-driven organisation, because of some of the questions that we've had to ask have not been mana enhancing, and I won't do that. I cannot do that. So, there's got to be a better way. Sure. So thank you, Minister.
Tēnā koe, Francis. And our last question, I know we've tried to get through as many as possible, but Janet Cole, I'll invite you for our last question.
Thank you. I know that you have to head off soon, so just keeping it short. One of the things that we know works is social procurement, the way to get to those groups who government traditionally has found hard to reach, to creating employment pathways for iwi, for Māori, for those with disabilities, mental health. How have you built in those social procurement processes for all of this employment generation?
Yeah, so it was mentioned before that the Ministry of Social Development is been given a bit of a boost in this to look at exactly those sorts of approaches. So they had an overall funding boost, I think, of about 400 million, and a part of that is exactly in the social procurement space. Actually, there's a lot more to do there, and there is a piece of work that's been going on between Nanaya Mahuta, Phil Twyford and Jenny Salisa around a new model of procurement that particularly supports groups who haven't traditionally been able to access government contracts and so forth. I have to say that piece of work wasn't quite finished by the time the budget came around, and so it's still underway. But Janet, if you've got ideas about how that might work, I would very, very strongly suggest that you speak to Phil or to Nanaya or Jenny via Shannon, because we'd like some help with how we shape that. As I say, the work hadn't quite been completed, so therefore it didn't figure directly in the budget. But the VRMSD, they're looking at that approaches to supporting organisations to be able to come in. But I'd love your help to make that really sing.
Excellent, thanks very much, Janet. And that concludes the time that we do have with the Minister. So apologies if we did miss your question this time round, but hopefully he'll be able to join us over the coming months again, just to hear and answer your questions directly. Can I thank everyone once again for joining us this afternoon, and particularly to you, Minister, Honourable Grant Robertson, for coming over to the Northcote whānau, for hearing our voices and answering our questions, and kia kaha tonu to the work that you and the team are doing down in Wellington. Mihi atu kia koe. But to all of our whānau out in Uruamo, Onewa, Kei Pātiki mā, thanks very much for your support. Thanks for logging on 7:30 AM bright and early. Yvonne, apologies that I didn't get to you, but I would like to bring Minister Sepuloni over to meet the ANCAD family and hear from her directly, so I'll follow up with that. Other than that, have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks again, and kia kaha tonu.
Thank you, Shannon. Kia ora.
Kia ora.